Hey guys, this video is for educational purposes only. Please do not break the law.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Growers MBA podcast. I'm back here with Elliott, our head consultant over at greenthumbdepot.com. Today, I wanted to kind of change it up, keep it a bit more casual, a bit more interesting, and learn a little bit more about you, Elliott. I mean, you're our head consultant. You've been in the industry for 27 years now, CEA expert. You've got quite an in-depth scientific background. And I kind of want to just learn more about your journey in the space and, what wisdom you've imparted, what wisdom you've learned over these 27 years of experience you've been in the space. So I guess just to start off with, how did you get into this exciting space?
All right. Well, I'm going to be dating myself here on this episode, but that's all right. So I actually first started cultivating cannabis when I was, I guess, about 16. I was in high school, just found the plant, loved it. And, back then, everything that you ever got had seeds in it. So it was easy to throw them into the ground and see what happened. So I think the first time I grew, I actually just took some seeds out of a bag and threw them in some pots and some soil in my closet and hung up some fluorescent lights, because there was no, at least where I was at in SoCal, in Temecula, in urban Temecula, suburban Temecula, there was no hydroponic stores. So I actually had to drive. I remember it was 67 miles from Temecula down to this place in San Diego. It was a garden center just to get GH 3-part. And that's all they had, that's all anyone had. It was just GH 3-part. In fact, they didn't even they would buy it in 5-gallon barrels or jugs, maybe even 55-gallon drums, and they would aliquot it out into individual gallons. So once in a while you get a gallon of the grow and it would have some green, some algae growing in there. And it was come on, guys, what are you guys doing to me? But we couldn't complain because that was the only game in town. So yeah, it was a long time ago.
And what do you think? I mean, that's kind of crazy to hear that you started growing when you were 16, because I know when I was 16, I would, message some random dude from my high school and meet him in a back alley and, buy a gram of weed off him for $20. But the thought never even remotely came to mind that, hey, maybe I should try growing this. So what do you think, kind of brought you in? What made you so interested? Because I can tell you that's the last thing I thought about as a 16-year-old kid.
Oh, wow. Well, two things really. First of all, allegedly, I was that guy that you would be calling to get that bag. So there was that motivation, it was profit. I was a businessman even at the tender age of 16. And the other thing is I've always liked to grow plants. I've always been around it. When we were young, my mom, my family, we didn't have a whole lot of money. So she actually did a lot of community gardening. And we lived in the Lakewood, Long Beach area. And she had a community garden in every city that was within 5-10 miles, because you could get one free with every city. So we would go around. She would take us around. Me and my brothers take us around to the different gardens, and we would just play in the dirt while she was harvesting the Brussels sprouts and broccoli and stuff like that. So always, since I can remember, always been around plants and gardening, and I owe that to my mom for sure.
Well, that's a pretty interesting upbringing and pretty unique, actually, to be surrounded by plants at such a young age. So how did you learn how to do this? Back then, I don't imagine there was a ton of resources available on how to do this stuff. And what type of system did you use to grow?
Well, so that first time I grew, that I put the seeds in the soil in the closet, actually, my mom found it, right? Classic story. And, she didn't know what to do. So she called her sister. And her sister's like, well, you got to yank those plants. So my mom yanked them, and they hadn't even started flowering yet. They were in veg. All right. So she yanks them. And then her sister, my aunt, tells her, yeah, do you want to give those to me? I'll make good use of them. So my mom yanked my plants and gave them to her sister. But whatever, water under the bridge. So that did not work out to a harvest. And I tried planting some seeds outside in the hills, and they got eaten by by the animals and whatnot. But the first harvest I ever got, my brother and I, we had ordered some seeds from Amsterdam. My brother did. And when we got the seeds, some people who are old enough might remember this, but there was a magazine called High Times. I think they're still around. And they had published a DIY hydro system you could make by taking 2-liter soda bottles, chopping the bottom off and flipping them upside down and then screwing them into PVC. And it was essentially like a bucket system. You'd have a reservoir and then the pump would pump it up into these 2-liter bottles upside down. And it was actually a great system. I mean, it's huge root masses on these plants. It was just beautiful. The whole 2-liter filled up with white roots. It was great. You could see the roots, which wasn't great because the light was hitting them. They were turning green at times, but still a nice system. And we grew Shiva skunk and Big Bud from some place in Amsterdam. I can't remember. I think it might have been Bluebird. But anyway, and this is the best part of the story. So this was right before I graduated high school, allegedly. And my brother and I traveled to Europe after I graduated high school. And we were like at week 4 when we left. So week 5 through 8, basically, I was in Europe. My brother and I were in Europe. And we told my mom. By this time, she came around and she was actually okay with it. And we said, hey, Mom, can you just top off the reservoir? Like, you really don't need to do anything else, right? We'll see how it works. So she topped off the reservoir for 4 weeks during the most critical part of flowering. And this system was so janky. The lights, it was like fluorescent. There was some like clamp-on lights with some, I don't remember the bulbs or lamps that were in there, but it was crazy. And we came back and it was the most beautiful harvest. Huge colas from the Big Bud. The Shiva skunk was just white with crystals. Like everything was perfect. Everything honestly was absolutely perfect. I couldn't believe it. I looked at my mom like, what did you do? Like, she's like, I just did what you asked, And so the first harvest that I ever successfully brought down was a family effort. It's my brother and a lot of help from my mom. So, and then that lasted me probably about halfway through my first year of college. Yeah. So that's cool.
Okay. So hold on. I'm a little bit confused. So at first your mom gave your plant to your aunt and threw it out. What happened? Where did I miss in between there where she went from throwing your plant out to actually helping you grow these dank buds?
Well, I guess you could just say I can be pretty convincing at times. I think in the year or so in between the two events, I always got great grades. I got straight A's. I got into college and everything. So I think maybe she was less concerned about that, about how, smoking cannabis can affect, your grades and your motivation and drive and whatnot. So I guess she was just okay with it. And she may or may not have actually partaken herself at times. Sorry, Mom.
Wow. Go mom. That's a pretty awesome story. So
Go Mom.
yeah. W mom out there. So going back to learning how to do this in High Times and Random Magazine and kind of putting together this janky situation. Now in 2026, we're kind of like where the technology has advanced like so profusely. Like, how have you seen things change from way back then all the way to now? It's in some ways, I'm sure there are some similarities, but in some ways, obviously, you've got giant grow rooms, commercial size rooms that are the size of football fields, what else have you seen change?
Oh man, honestly, like almost everything has changed. Here in California, there was some legislation that was passed, Prop 215, that kind of ushered in a golden age in California because it legalized the plant, but it put very few regulations on it. So, we were growing home grow and selling, a decent size grow, but not a huge commercial, but we were making the best quality herb that you could possibly get. The focus wasn't really to make money. It was just like, what is the best that we can do? And back in those days, like we were slinging pounds for $5,000 a pound. I'd go into the dispensary and these guys would be like, how much more do you have at home? They couldn't get enough of it. And nowadays it's not quite as expensive. You can't sell your packs for that even if they're high quality. So what's changed? I mean, the nice thing is with legalization, various different types of legalization, state by state, that's happened. The good thing is that we have less people going to jail for it. We have less people that their lives are just completely ruined because of this, which I'm personally very thankful for that. On the flip side, we're making a lot less money. The margins are compressed. And, a lot of big businesses have gotten into it and are kind of taken over. So there's some folks that really have from day one been against legalization in any form because of what it's done to the prices. But it's a balance, right? So the higher the risk on the black market, the more you can command on the price. Once things become legal, then it just becomes a commodity. The margins get compressed, but hey, people aren't going to jail. So there's it's a double-edged sword, and there is a lot of deep emotions that people feel about this when the subject comes up. So I just want to be clear that I understand both sides, and there's pluses and minuses. I'm not advocating one or the other, but that's kind of the legal aspect. From a technology aspect, a lot has changed as well. We went from, in my neck of the woods, not having any hydro stores to having now, like at the peak in LA, like there's like 3 hydro stores on every block in certain areas. It's kind of ridiculous. And everyone is growing weed. There's a lot of trap grows. And then, with more and more legalization, now it's gotten to the point where a lot of those are going away, and you're just having these huge centralized licensed commercial facilities that are maybe run by people who unfortunately spent years fighting legalization and putting people in jail. I mean, so it's a bit bittersweet, but the technology that has come out of that is pretty cool. We've gone from using whatever lights you could find to HPS and metal halides to LEDs. There were some CMHs there briefly. Most people aren't using those now, but almost everybody, I wouldn't say almost everybody, but the majority of folks are using LEDs now, which are safer. You can tune the spectra. You can, there's all this research that's being done now. Well, we never had any of that available. Like we just had to do our own research. We had to guess. We had to talk to one another and read books. And yeah.
So how do you think that's affected kind of like the culture since you started at the very beginning? I've talked to quite a few people who are like, what, back in the day, man, it was like the Wild West, things were crazy. Like obviously, it's a lot more cutthroat nowadays, a lot more scientific, probably a lot more professional. A lot of people in suits are involved now, so how have you seen the culture in general change with inside the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of the obvious thing where it's gone from folks that were dedicating their lives to the plant, really believed in it, and entrepreneurial spirit. It's gone to this corporate sort of thing in a lot of situations now, depending on where you're at in the country. And that's kind of sad. I mean, I really do appreciate that other culture that is kind of slowly going away. There are people that came from that culture that are now being, fulfilling that professional role themselves. And I love to see that. But on the other hand, there are positives to it too. Back in the day when I was growing a lot, everybody would develop their own recipes for nutrients, for example. And this is a closely guarded secret. Like you never gave your recipe to the other guy because it was something that you worked on, your whole life. It was your trade secret, right? And Lord knows I would never tell anyone. I still don't tell people my recipe because it's a great recipe. And, I like to keep it secret, but the truth of it is nowadays there's a lot more published literature. There's scientific studies being done on cannabis. There's all this science that the equipment manufacturers are doing, the nutrient manufacturers are doing, actual controlled experiments. So there's a lot more published knowledge. So it's less mystical in a way, in some ways. But like a lot of things nowadays, there's so much data that it can be data overload, and it's hard to know what to trust. What's legit, what is just hype, what's just spin. And so the truth is out there, as they say, but it does still take a discerning eye to understand what really matters. But I mean, I love it. Like what people are doing now with, UV augmentation, with the Emerson effect and deep red and far red spectra. I mean, we never had any clue about this when I was young. It was like, use a metal halide for veg and use an HPS for flower. That was the golden rule right there. That was about as close to spectrum tuning as we got. So there's like a lot of things in life, there's pluses, there's minuses, and you got to just take the good and roll with the bad and make what you can of it.
Yeah, the recipe thing reminds me of, if you ever seen Breaking Bad, Jesse Pinkman, like when he first started cooking meth on his own, he's like, "Yeah, man, I put chili flakes in it. It's my signature move." And so it just kind of reminds me of probably back then there was a lot of people who had their own recipe that probably wasn't even actually all that good, but they protected it with their life. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you kind of, so you've seen a lot of those people who, were super the cowboys back in the day, and you said some of them are still around today, and that's really cool. But, I mean, what do you think it takes to survive these days? Like what's the like main trait to survive in this industry? Because it is quite cutthroat. You said it yourself, margins have completely disappeared. It's not an easy industry to get into for sure. So my main question is, what does it take to survive in this cutthroat industry today? Like, what makes you stand out?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things. It's not just one thing for sure. Attention to detail. Let's face it, the margins are tight in this industry right now. And you can't just be a good grower. You've got to be a good businessman. You've got to, anytime you buy equipment, you got to get the best price. If you're buying lights or dehues or pumps, you got to check for rebates, right? Because if you're not doing this type of stuff, the guy down the street is, and he's going to have lower cost, and he's going to be able to undercut you, and you're going to go out of business, And so, that huge margin that we were able to play with before because it was a black market industry, it's just not there anymore. And that was a safety net. And you could get away with a lot of stupid stuff. Lord knows I've done stupid stuff, when I was growing, but you just can't do that nowadays. So it's attention to detail. If you get 1% more yield, you save a point, you save a point or two on the equipment. I mean, this is what makes or breaks people. In addition to all that though, you have to grow the highest quality herb that you can, unless you're processing it. So there's a tremendous amount of processing. So we're talking edibles and concentrates and stuff. Now they can get away with a bit lower quality on that side because who knows what the flower looks like by the time you got a pen, right? But if you're selling flower, like, you have got to have the highest quality flower that you can produce, because what's happening is there's a glut of supply. There's too much on the market. And if yours isn't moving, you might even be able to get it into a dispensary. But if it's not moving because it doesn't look good and it just sits there, shelf life is limited, and the dispo is not going to reorder. And so you've got to have and it's not just about THC anymore. For a while, people are just like, oh, I just want the highest THC, which is ridiculous. But that's what it was. Now people are waking up and they're like, no, the entourage effect, terpenes, like, we need the flavor. It's not just for the flavor, it's for the effect as well. And also, if you have all those terpenes, then you're also going to typically have a longer shelf life as well. The two are kind of related. So, basically you have to have your game together on all fronts. You really do. And I guess the last thing would just be, you got to have the heart for it. Like, you have to really, really love this industry. You have to love growing plants. You have to love being an entrepreneur. You have to love crunching numbers. If you don't love all of that, or have a team that you can, partition it out, and whoever's doing what, they love what they do, like a lot of industries, if you don't love what you do, you're fighting an uphill battle.
So yeah, I mean, just like in football, it seems like it's just a game of inches. If you can get 1%, like a 1% advantage over and over and over again, just hammering those tiny little advantages every opportunity you get. Seems like that's really what it comes down to. But it like I said, it does seem quite cutthroat. It's not an easy industry to be in, because not only do you need to win every inch, but you've got to make sure your bud is a very high quality bud. And by the way, it's just really lucky for everybody listening to this episode that you guys can reach out to us anytime to get the best pricing on literally any piece of equipment. So just going to throw that out there again. Talk to me or Elliott, and we can get you the absolute best pricing on dehues, lights, whatever you need. If you guys need help with rebates, we can also help there as well.
I'll add that, we're also here to help you grow the finest herb that you can. I mean, that's my role personally here, is to help you work through all that. So while I might not give you my personal secret sauce recipe, I will help you develop your own. I will help you understand all these different things. We, as a team, are here to do it, and couldn't be happier to do it.
And so I just wanted to finalize this off or finish this off really quickly. Has been a lot of changes in the industry. That's kind of been the theme of this episode. And one of the big things that have obviously happened recently is Trump. Whether you love him or you hate him, the he's rescheduled cannabis, and that has happened. That is a fact. It is rescheduled, right? So
Right.
I know it's quite political. There's a lot of takes on it. I know it's a very heated debate. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? A lot of people think that this opens up the road to like this. Now it's just going to be pharmaceutical companies that are involved, and it's going to cut out a lot of the small people. Other people think that this is really good. It's less regulation on us, more access potentially to banking. We're heading in the right direction. I think there's pluses and minuses on both sides. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much summed it up right there. I mean, honestly, it's not unlike what happened with Prop 64 in California, where it just it opened it up. I'll specifically talk about rescheduling. I mean, by rescheduling it, it does open it up for medical research and whatnot. And again, on one hand, like you said, it opens it up to the pharma companies. They spent billions, if not more, over the years keeping the plant illegal, putting people in jail essentially because they were afraid of the medicinal qualities of the plant. And now they're going to come in because they have all the money and take over the industry. I mean, that's probably going to happen to some extent, and that's unfortunate. I don't like that any more than the next guy in this industry. On the other hand, there is legitimate medical value for the plant, and it's good to see that it's being accepted now as that. And I think we kind of just need to roll with it. We're not able to change what is, but we can understand how it affects us. The one thing I will say about the medical aspect, so my mom got a squamous cell carcinoma tumor on her arm a while back, and we treated it with a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD and RSO, and it killed the cancer. It, over the course of 6 weeks, turned black, fell off, healed up, did a final biopsy, no cancer remaining. Pretty amazing. And I talked to a lot of people about that. I'm not a doctor, by the way. This is not medical advice, but don't sue me, bro. But it does work in a lot of the cases, and it's a beautiful thing that it does, and we are able to understand the molecular biology of it now. So, as you know, James, I came from the biotech industry, and I used to work in a cancer research lab, degree in molecular biology. And what's disappointing is when we talk to my mom's doctors, they didn't know anything about the molecular biology of cancer. They didn't know anything about cannabis and how it interacts with cancer and stimulates the body's own immune system to attack the cancer. And now with rescheduling, it's going to be more accepted. But the interesting thing, my prediction is that you're going to have the pharma companies come in and they're going to do all this research. And then what they do to get it through the FDA is create a single molecule drug in a pill form, typically. And that's how they get it through the FDA. It's a complicated process. And I won't get into why it's set up that way and whatnot. But the end result is there's going to be cannabis extract, single molecules that are eventually just going to be synthesized, not even produced by the plant, and sold as cannabis-based medication as a single molecule. And then hopefully there will still be the medical side of cannabis itself, the plant. You could go out and get flower or extracts from cannabis. But the irony is that those folks that are still using the plant-based medicine are going to be in a way better position than the people that opt for the pill that's potentially paid for by the health insurance companies and whatnot. And the main reasoning is that cannabis is a very complex plant, and the active ingredients, you could point to THC and CBD, CBG, and whatnot, but really it's not about any individual molecule. It's about how all of these molecules work together. So I've talked to a lot of people that are fighting cancer, and some of them, they have this attitude like, I don't want to use cannabis because I don't do drugs, and meanwhile they're on chemo, and I'm like, well, you're doing drugs, and those drugs are actually designed to basically bring you to the edge of death, and then they bring you back. Whereas, this plant that has molecules in it that you're considering drugs, it's never killed anybody, not unless, you dropped a, 100-pound bale on somebody's head or something like that. But the molecules themselves are very safe, and especially when in a whole plant form, full spectrum extract, or vaping or smoking the whole plant itself. So there's going to be a lot of changes, and again, there's some good and there's some bad. None of us except the president really have a say in this rescheduling, so we just got to accept what it is. Vote, but accept what it is and make the most out of it. And me personally, I think in the long run, it's a good thing to free the plant and to get it into people's hands that really need it, and to reduce the stigma associated with it. Because even to this day, I mean, all the literature's out there. If you check in, PubMed, you can see all the literature talking about how cannabis kills cancer. But every day I talk to people about it, and every day, every single time, with few exceptions, people are like, "Really? I had no idea." It's kind of weird that there's this like cure to cancer that is right under our noses, so to speak, and most people don't even know about it. A lot of people that smoke cannabis don't even know about
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know about it, to be honest. So I'll always learn something from you, Elliot. But yeah, I mean, it's super fascinating to see where everything's going. It's super fascinating to see where everything's going. I do pay quite a bit of attention to a lot of the biotech companies out there, and a lot of these chemicals, these kind of like very healing chemicals, psilocybin as well. They're getting really broken down into like the healing part of it, right? And it's
it.
you can argue whether or not that's actually still going to be helpful or not, but it's pretty interesting to see how it's all working, and even like, you mentioned people that don't want to ever try drugs. You got that Rick Perry out of Texas, he's conservative politician his whole life, super Christian guy. And now he's pushing Ibogaine as a cure, not cure, but like as a, it helps soldiers with PTSD, so it's interesting to see how open-minded some people can be, when it comes down to it. So last question I have here is just, for everyone listening, they might get a little bit nervous here. They might think, shoot, maybe I should not get into this industry. It sounds really hard to get into the space. Do you think the cannabis industry as we know it today will still be around in the next 10 years? It's a tough question.
Oh yeah, it'll be around. I mean, alcohol's still around, right? And alcohol, causes a whole list of problems. And even if you're not even considering the medicinal aspect, just recreationally, I've always preferred there. I mean, I remember the first time I actually got high. I was outside my mom's house where she's still living, where I was growing the plants in the closet. And I just remember the first thought that came to my mind was, why would anyone drink alcohol? Because I could continue to, I felt great, but I could continue to have a intellectual conversation. So I think, cannabis has been around for, I think there's documented use of cannabis in humans like 35,000 years ago, I think. So it's been around for a long time. I don't think it's going anywhere. It is changing. So the business is changing. So the important thing is just stay on top of the trends, and I don't mean the trends like the trendy trends, but I mean like the science, right? When people like now, people are really talking about the Emerson effect a lot with the deep red and the far red. Like, learn it, understand it, incorporate it, get that UV in. If you're not using these techniques, again, you're going to fall by the wayside because other people are. So you got to stay on top of the science, stay on top of the equipment, build a good team. That is the most important thing. Because there's no way you're going to be able to do everything yourself. The people you have on your team are critical. And there are people that have been doing this for years that know so much about what they're doing. Get these people on your team. Build a cohesive team, a team that works together, plays together, enjoys. It's really critical. But absolutely, the industry is going to be around. And if you're new to it and you're thinking like, should I get into this or not? Give us a call.
Well, Elliot, I mean, that's, as always, I appreciate listening to you, hearing everything you have to say, and just to comment on all of that. We can help you guys with anything you need. I mean, we're here to help you optimize. We've helped countless grows get started from the very beginning, and now they have full-fledged businesses. So they're thriving. So if you work with Green Thumb Depot, you're going to thrive. Let's just put it like that. So I'll leave it at that. As always, Elliot, I really appreciate the conversation, and we'll be back next week for another episode.
Thanks, James. Looking forward to it. Take care.